Okay. Good morning, everybody. People who have logged in from India, and good evening to people who have logged in from the Valley. Uh, I have two great speakers today, both from the Valley, who are going to talk about Kubernetes and what business value one can achieve through Kubernetes, and why this could be a game changer for startups and enterprises who are adopting digital transformation, or even startups who are basically on cloud. How containers and Kubernetes could be a very uh, differentiating factor for them. I would like to introduce both our speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Ravi Magaluri. Uh, Ravi Magaluri is the CTO of Sify, where he works closely with customers on cloud strategy and architecture, and also advises them on the digital transformation. He's responsible for cloud management platform and service portfolios and product management. And Ravi is a pass out of IIT Madras. Uh, Thank you, Ravi, for coming in, and appreciate your time here.
Welcome.
We have other speaker, Jim Bugwadia. Jim is founder of, co-founder and CEO of Nirmata. Probably Jim will talk more about what Nirmata does, but Nirmata is basically a company which is solving the day-to problems of Kubernetes, which means that they are able to govern, they are able to manage their Kubernetes across different cloud through one single dashboard. And also, if there is any issue, any containers, they are able to do a root cause analysis, and can give those actionable insights to developers and administrators. Jim also previously, before starting Nirmata, he had held multiple leadership roles in Cisco and others. Jim, and thank you for your time as well.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And so we're going to have a session where Jim will be moderating the session, and Ravi will be answering those questions, and Jim will be also providing his perspectives on certain aspects. So I will hand it over to Jim, and maybe Jim, you can get started with actually what exactly is a container and what is Kubernetes, and then basically we talk about what Nirmata, just to give an introduction about what Nirmata is, and then you can start with the Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Radesh, and thank you, Mesha, and everybody from Bloom for setting this up. So good morning and good evening, everyone, based on your time zones. So as Radesh said, so we'll keep this very conversational, but given this format, we also prepared a few slides to just act as guidelines, as a backdrop. Please feel free, as questions come up, please feel free to put them in chat. We'll take them towards the end, or based on time, we can also, take them as we're going along. So to start with, just to level set in terms of the technologies, talk a little bit about what is Kubernetes, what is cloud native, and what does some of this really mean, right? So the one question we often get is, first off, starting with something, the basics, which are containers. What are containers and why are they different from virtual machines? And the interesting thing is, if you've used any form of web hosting, probably for the last 20 years, you've already used containers, right? So Linux containers are not a new thing. They've just become popular in the last few years, like the last 5 or so years, because of the ease of use, much like, software has disrupted everything else. Once containers got a software API, now developers could use them in manners which were not possible before. Whereas, like in the past, Linux containers were fairly hard to use, and the use cases for those with like Perils and some companies that were working with those were limited to some specific things like web hosting. So what happened was like in the like around 2012, 2013, a company called Dot Cloud was building a platform as a service, so something like a cloud foundry. And the dirty secret of every PaaS was each PaaS had a container technology underneath it. So each one of them had their own proprietary containers. But what Dot Cloud found was to make it easy for them to operate their paths, they kept adding some DevOps best practices, some ways to build containers easily, even manage and run containers easily. And ultimately that evolved into what we now know as Docker, the famous container engine. So around 2013 is when Dot Cloud changed their name to Docker, and went after sort of the container space, and that really exploded in terms of popularity with developers because of the ease of use, the way containers allow packaging code. So containers, to answer, to think about it, it's a form of virtualization, but it's OS virtualization versus hypervisor-based virtualization, which VMs provide. And when you containerize applications, you can now standardize not only the image management of the applications, but also, you can standardize the runtime of the applications. So that provides a lot of value in how applications can be managed, deployed, operated on any system that provides containers. So this really revolutionized how the packaging, the deployment management of these components. But then what also happens is, as we're looking at applications for the cloud, and this was an evolution going on with application architectures, microservices style architecture started becoming popular, where larger applications were broken up into smaller services. And this kind of it started introducing the need for a way to manage all of these containers. And that's where systems like Kubernetes emerged. At that time, like back in 2013, there were other systems like Mesos, which were also popular for managing containers. But over time, Kubernetes has emerged as a de facto choice for container management systems. And now, it's been broadly adopted by every cloud provider, almost every infrastructure vendor. And it's almost become, and we'll talk about this and reference this in the various sections. In many ways, it's become like the operating system for cloud, right? So what Linux was to data centers, Kubernetes now is to distributed systems in cloud, and it really unleashes the next generation of software innovation. So that's just a brief overview. A little bit, Radesh was asking about what Nirmata does, and he mentioned very well some of our core value propositions. So really, it's quite simple. As enterprises and businesses continue adopting Kubernetes, and as more and more clusters have to be managed, we provide a management plane for Kubernetes, independent of where Kubernetes is running, which cloud, which infrastructure, and provide that uniform set of system management capabilities across clusters and workloads. But with that, and with that brief background on the technology, let me start by the first, and really to get to the guts of it, right? So I talked about what Kubernetes is as a technology, which is great, but I want to know, and I think all of us want to know from Ravi, is like, what does this mean to a business, and how does Kubernetes impact businesses?
Thanks, Tim. So what we have to understand is we have been hearing all the time the flavor of the messaging changes, but the requirement of the business has never changed. The requirement of business has been how to really, I mean, no matter which business you are in, I mean, it's been long enough since we have seen the dot-com, before the dot-com days and post-dot-com days, and where, back in the day, we used to talk about why they should have a website and all, but now nobody even talks about digital presence. It is a given. So technology, whether in the form of a digital presence like a website, social media presence, the fundamental goal has been to make their prospective customers get ahead of, I mean, get in front of their services, influence the customer behavior to subscribe or purchase those services. This has been the only goal. How do I make my target audience get to know what I have to offer fast enough, in a convenient way, in a way that they understand everything about my service and make them buy. Now, from time to time, there are different tools that have been used on different cafes, and there are time to time there are problems in the back office. How do I make my service scalable? How do I make my service highly available? How do I make my service, resilient in face of disasters and things like that? These fundamental pursuits have never changed. Only thing is the options available to us by way of technology have been improving and changing from time to time. So now, every business has become a technology business is a meme or a cliche that every one of you have heard about it multiple times by now. So, should I be in the business of managing technology, or should I be in the business of managing my, my services and my customers? So, in the beginning, people used to conservatively over provision their when people were having servers and infrastructure in their data centers, they always used to scale it multiple times than their normal load. So somebody said during certain peak times, my load will be 5 times the normal, so I will buy 5 times the hardware that I normally use. So from there, we have gotten into clouds with virtualization. Virtualization did not exactly reduce the cost, but it reduced the size of the infrastructure that they are buying. So right sizing the demand rather than right sizing the price. So we are still focusing on infrastructure and not applications. Now, with the advances in the cloud technology, where infrastructure is no longer a problem that needed to be solved, people started focusing back on, and with the availability of containers and Kubernetes and all these, of course, people said, hey, why don't I go back to my real problem? My real problem is, how do I design, develop, and operate my business applications, which is what I'm here for. So the message that I want to give you is containers are today's answer to the problems that have been there all through. How do I bring value to my customers? How do I, in turn, bring value to my business by increasing my sales? So Jim has already explained what exactly is Kubernetes doing briefly. So Kubernetes will allow you to focus on application rather than infrastructure. Now, if you have tight dependency on the application and the environment in which it runs, it is a recipe for inefficiency. So Kubernetes exactly decouples that necessity of the application to know about the environment in which it would run, and thereby increasing consistency. So the thing is, if you start developing something, you can be rest assured that the configurations and all these things will carry through to testing and production and all those things without any problems or bugs creeping in. So standardization and streamlining will increase the efficiencies, which is what Kubernetes will allow you to do. Back to you, Jay.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's very interesting, right? And like you very well put it, it's more about, and we've always been dealing with this problem for businesses to get to decrease and make more efficient that time to value proposition, right? So it seems like now with virtualization, then cloud, and now containers and Kubernetes, we're finally getting close to what the I guess that value proposition all along. But one thing that comes up often is, okay, like, so we've seen this before, right? So we've seen technology trends every 5 years, 10 years. There's some new buzzword, there's something new that comes up. We had OpenStack, which was super popular, that was going to change everything. We had like big data tools, which were popular, and some of those have more or less fizzled away, right? And now Kubernetes is the hot new thing. So is this just yet another buzzword in your opinion, or is this something that's going to last?
So let's look at what is required to run an application, right? So let's look at the life cycle of the application. So you can cut it from multiple directions. So if you start talking about how do I develop my application, how do I test it, and how do I transition it into production. That is one direction. The other direction is the developers will never know how much hardware is required, what kind of hardening, what kind of best practices to follow when it goes to production level scaling, volumes and all that. So likewise, the infrastructure guys, if you start, they will want to figure out how do I provision the infrastructure very quickly and with agility, scale it up and scale it down. These are their concerns. So multiple people have multiple concerns in making something run. Now, if you were to solve most of the efforts that we have seen, as I mentioned before, were focused on infrastructure planning, abstracting the infrastructure configuration from the application configuration, and then scaling it up, hardening it for security, ensuring that it has manageability and all those things. But if you look at like I said, full requirements, you will have to deal with orchestrating applications, orchestrating infrastructure, orchestrating security policies, a whole bunch of things. Now, if you solve all of those things, that's where they do not possibly do a complete job, and they do not do a good job, and that's why the promise perhaps did not live up to the hype. So what is Kubernetes doing a little differently? It never sought to do everything. It's only doing a very simple thing at its core, which is orchestrating and scheduling containers to run. Everything else is possible through pluggable framework, and everything else it doesn't pretend to do. As the cliche goes, cleaning your kitchen sink or whatever. That is step number one, meaning it stayed focused on a very simple core concept and powerful one of how do I spin up and spin out containers and how do I set them to run. On top of that, this is transitioned over to Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which ensures a certain amount of discipline, and it has a very large community. So, as we said, it is a pluggable framework. It has therefore seen adoption to PaaS providers, to new technologies like the AI, ML, and serverless. It has become very versatile on that core facilities that it gives, making it possible for running the CI/CD pipelines or whatever the application management process very easy. So because of this, a solid core and very robust core with a pluggable framework which allows for people to introduce what are the things that are required, right? So identity access management, load balancing, network management. Look, all of these things are coming from outside, and that gives the people the completeness that they're requiring, at the same time and predictability and consistency. So we believe, therefore, it is here to stay for a foreseeable future as we know it today.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? Because it's almost like less is more in this case, right? Where Kubernetes, like you very well said, at its guts, it's simple, it's elegant, it's a scheduling system, and I think what a lot of enterprises don't realize, or at least some of the early adopters didn't realize, is that it's incomplete to begin with, right? So it's not meant to be a complete system. It's not a Cloud Foundry or an OpenShift or any of those where it's like a full complete system. It's meant to be incomplete if you just look at open source Kubernetes, but it provides all the right extensions where whether it's companies like Nirmata or others in the ecosystem can fill in the gaps and allow that with different levels of flexibility and enable different options for customers and adopters. So definitely, and the other key point I think which you also made was what's very interesting is to see that it's become the platform on which to build the next generation of platforms, right? So things like whether it's Kubeflow for AI ML, serverless frameworks like Knative, even writing new applications. You can use Kubernetes to produce an entire application using some of the core machinery. So pretty interesting concepts and things which are extensible. So one related, topic which comes up often, and just like, with any new technology, when it comes out, of course, there's naysayers, there's advocates, and there's always like, oh, this is great, but it doesn't work for, like whatever, some other set of technologies, right? So one of the things we heard quite often, and with some validity, is that containers are great, but my application is not stateless. Containers are great, but I'm not writing microservices. Most of my enterprise applications are fairly stateful, built using traditional architectures. So are containers only good for microservices and cloud native apps, or is there value with other application architectures?
So we have to look back the popularity of microservices and containers has been sort of coterminous. The failure of previous distributed applications such as SOAP and the
Corba.
protest against that as by way of SOAP and RESTful. I remember reading about people slighting somebody's language right RESTful APIs. No, no, no. It is not REST API, it is RESTful API. All those things we have seen. So around the last 5 years, the popularity of microservices and containers has grown in parallel, but people have seen the natural advantage of putting them together. But that doesn't mean containers are only for microservices. And like you have mentioned earlier in this call, containers have been there for the last couple of decades in the Linux world. Now, what it is doing is it is giving you a isolated space in which to, in plain English, right? I don't want to be technically very accurate. So it slices the operating system as opposed to slicing the hardware on which you will load an entire operating system. It is slicing an operating system in which you will run your processes. That is the container. So if we run an application I mean, even if it is traditionally architected, monolithic or old-fashioned application, and if you load it in a container, you are not paying the penalty for hypervisor and virtualization to start with. So it will take less resources from the hardware at the very basic. Subsequently, the advantages of containers run by Kubernetes, such as it allows you to run multiple copies of the same application in different containers. So that is what leads to the pattern of blueprint deployment. So for those who, I'm sure all the audience here is familiar with it, but for those who may not, a blueprint deployment philosophy is that where if you have, let's say, half a dozen virtual machines in which you are running your web layer, you will replace a couple of them with a new release as a result of introduction of a new feature, or it's a bug fix or whatever. And both of them will be receiving traffic simultaneously. And then when the newly released, the new patch is functioning all right, you will keep rolling patching. You'll do what is known as rolling patch, and all the greens will become blue, waiting for the next update to come. These kind of things are possible very elegantly with containers and containerized application deployment. So this is also something that allows you to do what is known as zero downtime. And if you use platforms as a service or software as a service, they do not go down, right? So how do they do that? How can we get the same advantages of born in the cloud or software as a service kind of offerings for our own applications, which were done long back? So the power of container as a runtime environment compared to a virtual machine is these things. So how do I get the advantages of software as a service kind of powerful service benefits? So if you are doing this for one or two applications with containers with your own orchestration mechanisms, Perhaps you can do that without Kubernetes and these other technologies. But if you have most of the large businesses which have been running over time, we have seen in our experience, whenever we were migrating customers from on-premise or co-location to cloud, there will be typically dozens of applications, and they don't even have uh, clear understanding of what is the sequence in which I have to gracefully bring these down and move them and things like that. So most of the time, it's a question of discovery and then analysis of the workloads and all that. All that work can be streamlined in choosing to go with containers and choosing to go with Kubernetes kind of a system, because now you can rationalize the policies, now you can make them consistent. Here on forward, it will give you all the benefits of modern applications without exactly having to rip and replace, sometimes which may not even be possible because people don't know where those applications were sourced from, who developed them, where is the code. People are even scared to restart some of these applications during physical to virtual migration. So it definitely, on the whole, is very, very helpful for not just microservices and modern applications, but to modernize traditional applications as well, in the sense of getting the benefits without doing the heavy lifting.
Interesting, right? So even if you don't change the architecture of the application, but instead of that, you kind of just put it in a container. So getting that portability, getting the ability to decouple the application from the infrastructure, yeah, those do seem like clear value propositions, clear advantages, and things that can be gained. It's interesting, and I think there were some reports from analysts, et cetera, where they're saying, in fact, that trend is growing, right? So initially, of course, all of the new applications that were being containerized tended to be the born in the cloud type of applications, right? But now more and more we're seeing enterprise, very traditional enterprise applications moving to containers to take advantages of some of these points you exactly made. So, but let's kind of play devil's advocate a little bit and say, look, I'm an enterprise, or maybe I'm a startup. I built everything on a cloud system. I've used VMs. I can, if I'm in a cloud, I can spin up machines pretty well. I know how to use Puppet, Chef, Jenkins. Maybe I've done some automated. I have my DevOps team. Am I really going to get, do I need to make this change? Am I going to get any benefits from containerizing? If something's working, why change, right? That question comes up. So how would you address that?
So this is typically it's not a philosophy, it's not a what do you call religious opinion or anything like that. It's about business requirement, pure and simple. No matter whose opinion is what, if you want to go out of the hyperscale cloud services, if you want to have the ability to go in and go out at will, you don't have a choice other than going with containers and a management system like Kubernetes. So if you want to be cloud agnostic, you have to go full-fledged instead of staying with VMs. In general, stay away from the portability. Has two sides to it, right? On the one side, it gives you choice to move, but on the other side, it will not allow you to take full advantage of the provider specific features. So it depends, like I already said, on the choice and the business context in which those choices are being made. So for now, everybody, I keep reading every now and then how companies have repatriated their subscriptions from public cloud back into private environment. And every other day, we ourselves take customers away from private or co-locations to public cloud. We are seeing both the trends. So people have to make those decisions. But if they do look for cloud agnosticity, if they do look for portability, if they do look for rapidly innovating with the flexibility of staying on private, moving to public back and forth, this is the choice. The VM level technology will not give you the necessary agility.
Right. Yeah, and one thing to add to that, right? So what we've also seen, and we'll talk a little bit more about hybrid architectures and hybrid cloud, but like if you talked about we spoke about hybrid cloud, let's say like about 10 years ago, everyone was, enamored by things like cloud bursting and running the same application across clouds. But the reality, is interesting. That's not the more prominent use case. But what we are seeing is that flexibility, that choice, that businesses want to, choose where to deploy their application, and maybe they will have different copies of the same application. Like if you're running, like you're using a, video conference platform here, and even this provider, they've chosen multiple clouds and they run on multiple clouds for in different regions, and that really becomes a business enabler for them, right? Because it's interesting that it has led to, to really impacting, I guess, both the top line and the bottom line for the business in terms of agility, choice, and flexibility. And I think the other thing to point out is, like what you also highlighted, which we see often, is so lock-in is all about a trade-off, right? So sure, I mean, lock-in could be a bad thing, but if you're getting some value for it, we some maybe it's okay to agree to that. But at some point, for businesses, what tends to happen is that lock-in sort of impairs their choices. It restricts what the business enables, and multi-cloud then actually opens up some new avenues and new business opportunities, which is where I think again containers become that de facto choice, along with Kubernetes and other things. Okay, so let's actually shift into to hybrid and multi-cloud, right? Because that's a fascinating area, and even that those topics have evolved quite a bit, and how we used to think about hybrid cloud, 5-10 years ago, and what's happening now, with actually a number of businesses going more and more towards using multiple cloud like Azure, AWS, GCP, and even some on-prem. So just to start off with, from your point of view, and given the history and the time you spent with virtualization, data center, and other technologies, um, tell us like what exactly is hybrid multi-cloud at this point?
So multi-cloud is I mean, see, it depends on point of view. Is hybrid cloud a superset of multi-cloud, or is multi-cloud a superset of hybrid cloud? Depends on the way people look at it. Definitely, they are not interchangeable. In my view, a multi-cloud perhaps can be looked at as a superset of a hybrid cloud. But what exactly is a hybrid cloud? What or multi-cloud for that matter? So it involves stretching the application or workload in a more generic frame of reference, stretching the workload across two different clouds, two or more clouds. So one of them has to be a private, and the other one has to be any one of the hyperscale or public clouds as they are called. So if you have some parts of the application on the private and some parts on the public, that is a hybrid cloud. Now, in the beginning days of cloud, this is something that everybody sold me. Cloud bursting. What exactly is cloud bursting? So, people were heavily invested in the infrastructure in their own data centers, in their own colocation centers. In those days, to make a public cloud even acceptable for conversation, the promise was often, hey, if you run out of your resources, you don't have to provision your cloud 5 times the normal load. Why don't you burst your application to cloud? So anybody who knows anything about application architecture will quickly know putting databases in private cloud and putting applications or web servers on the public cloud and all is a recipe for disaster, because instead of increasing the performance of your application, it will drag everything down with the latency in the mismatch that is between on everything collocated versus stretching the application across the WAN. But we'll come to that in a moment. But a hybrid cloud is a combination of one private and one public. A multi-cloud is something that is potentially two public clouds. A hybrid multi-cloud is where there is one private and two or more public. So let me give an example. So Larry Ellison has become super friendly with Microsoft, which is the strange things that we get to see. If people remember the battle between SQL Server database and Oracle database and all, they were not exactly battles. But today they're best of the pals because they both do not like the guy other side of the pond, which is AWS. So incidentally, Oracle is also having a very big presence in Seattle, and they went to Seattle to start their cloud business. Anyway, that is off the point. So a multi-cloud architecture that Larry proposed was that applications can run in Azure, and the database can be in Oracle, as in the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, the Oracle Public Cloud, and Azure from Microsoft. So that is a multi-cloud architecture. If you throw in a private part, such as, let me give you a real-life example. The real-life example is we have migrated for multiple customers all of their workload to a hyperscale cloud. However, they'll have, believe it or not, some applications that still run on AIX, and there are applications which are still in OS2 kind of very, very old systems, and that cannot be moved to a cloud environment. So we leave them in the private cloud, and we connect them with the other workloads which have moved to public cloud, and that is the hybrid. That is the element of hybridity. So there are other use cases also for people who require, let's say, synchronous disaster recovery kind of situations. We will put production in public cloud, and we put disaster recovery in private cloud for near real-time replication of data. And these are all hybrid use cases. So we are also talking about the uh, feasibility of hybrid cloud. As I already mentioned, the data is in the database or file servers and all. The behavior is in the application server. Most of the time, if the behavior is far away from the data, that leads to very, very inefficient application performance and unsatisfactory customer experience. So what people do is, so we were talking about stretching the application for hybridity across the clouds, right? So the stretching, what will you do? Will you put data on the private, and will you put application on the, like the cloud burst example people have been giving over times? So most of the time people end up taking the entire data to public cloud as well, along with the application. And this is a very painful, time-consuming activity because it takes several weeks to migrate the data on the wire. Sometimes it involves truck roll, like they come with a big box of storage, and they put it in your data center. After you put everything there, there is a downtime, which is still disruptive. So the hybrid cloud architectures have been the aspiration of people for a long time, but data migration is the, as the heading goes, the most painful and the long pole in the tent. There are solutions emerging for it, which we will look into, but that is the summary of the hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. Private plus public. If there is more than one public, that is multi.
Okay. Yeah, so bringing this back to, containers, cloud native, right? And also kind of looking at, so if you think about infrastructure vendors, whether it's, some of the cloud compute vendors or data center vendors and others providing services in this, right? So, and let's take, Sify as an example, right? So as you're leading the cloud technologies and the portfolio there, what do these technologies mean to like a data center infrastructure, a traditional, sort of infrastructure vendor who's moving or adapting to this? And what is it that, Sify is bringing into this hybrid multi-cloud realm?
Yeah, so the first thing that people relate to when the name Sify is mentioned is depending on what they know of the company, they will either think of us as a network company, they will also think of us as a data center company. Some other people will think of us as from the really olden times, the internet company with cyber cafes and all. So what we have done is we have taken a very careful analysis of the situation, and we um, presented ourselves for the last over 3 years. Whatever we do, whatever we have been doing over time, it is very nicely synthesized into a framework or a philosophy called clouded core. So in the beginning days, when we created data centers, and even today when we give people SD-WAN and network re-architecture, these are all cloud enabling technologies. So you need network to go and access your cloud. Likewise, cloud inspired. So we've been offering our own enterprise cloud. We've been offering SaaS-like offerings, which are typically as a service offerings. This is the cloud inspired. And cloud pure is where we take people, otherwise known as cloud native. We help people to migrate to clouds and all that. And cloud enhanced is where we help customers develop applications predicated on the pre-existence of cloud already, meaning they are already in the cloud. Now what? Why did we come to cloud? Going to the cloud in itself is not an end in the goal. Right? It's a end of the pursuit, right? I've gone to cloud to do something. So that is digital at core. Now that you're on the cloud, you can pursue your ambitions of digital transformation, and that is a digital at core. So Kubernetes, a managed Kubernetes is a service that helps customers pursue their application modernization. We do not write code for the customers, but we help them do those things related to modernizing their applications. And in that process, we don't want to stop short of giving anything to our customers. So managed Kubernetes is a natural extension of what we've been doing so far by way of managing the workloads for the customers. So what exactly is digital transformation? Digital transformation, while it started, has evolved subsequently into digital optimization with low-code frameworks, and everybody is saying, people like ServiceNow, people like maybe Salesforce, and some other people are saying, hey, you don't have to write any code. You have you have to model a workflow and then patch it with, pair it with my machine learning libraries, and you're good. So good for them, and that will, and robotic process automation, all those things fall into that category. So we offer those things as a service, tools as a service. Likewise, digital transformation for net new revenue streams, meaning I'm trying to do something completely new with whatever services I have, such as, the best example is Amazon started selling books and flowers and cakes, and eventually made a marketplace competing with eBay and all, where they started selling goods and wares of other retailers. So that's an adjacent to the new revenue, like that. Everybody wants to do new revenues. But the only way they can do that is by developing modern applications for marketplaces kind of offerings. So our customers are always looking for how do they get onto their journey. And in that process, not only are we giving them the entire clouded course portfolio of services, but we're standing with them in the next step of pursuing their digital transformation with the digital headquarters services.
Okay. But so when you're talking about Kubernetes as a service or a managed Kubernetes service, I mean, today you could go to one of the bigger clouds, and you could also, they have their flavors of that, right? So what is it again? Maybe just going in a little bit deeper. What can an infrastructure, like a provider like Sify do that's unique, that's competitive, that differentiates from that?
Yeah, so I stopped short. If you have, and if anybody has noticed, tactically the challenge is the long pole in the tent of hybrid cloud. So which is basically network latency. If you do not have a decent network latency between any parts of your application, that doesn't work. So the advances in network technology and the arrival of hyperscalers within India have given us an opportunity to give what is known as cloud adjacency. A cloud adjacency gives me access to hyperscale resources one way at a less than 100 microseconds latency. That is what they call pretty close to the wireline latency. So with this, I now have all the flexibility of hybrid multi-cloud that we spoke about a moment back to provision that. Now, that is definitely a unique advantage that we can give because we have this unique capability to give this very powerful, very quick, less than 100 microsecond latency. One thing is that. Second thing is we have data centers and we have access to. We are partners with all the three guys. We are partners with AWS and Oracle and Google, and we have these things in multiple cities. So people who are pursuing simple configurations like disaster recovery, to people who are pursuing a bona fide hybrid cloud, like stressing their applications across the clouds, such as because as we said, migration of data is the most painful thing. And one thing that you should also notice is every cloud is coming with a on-premise offering, whether Outpost from Amazon, Azure Stack from Azure, which has been around for a couple of years, Oracle's Cloud Machine. All these are cloud machines that are actually running in private space or private realm. So even they're partnering with us to facilitate it for the enterprises who would want to go the hybrid way. So partnering with all the three guys, setting up all their private cloud offerings, setting up our own enterprise private cloud based on our VMware technology platforms, along with cloud adjacency. These are all unique things that we give. And if we had the application management services on top of that, I may sound like a sales pitch, but frankly speaking, that's an advantage that we offer.
Interesting, right? So now going, yeah, and like you were talking about with the hybrid cloud architectures, certainly having the ability to spin up compute and attach it to data, without having to move the data, that sounds pretty interesting and appealing, right? Because with backup DR and other use cases, just opens up some advantage. So, and talking about partners, and you mentioned that Sify has partnered with all of the big cloud providers. Sify has also partnered with Nirmata, right? And what I want to know is, of course, we've on and off we've had conversations, maybe for the last 2 years or so, about containers, about Kubernetes. So maybe for the audience, if you could mention what led you to the platform choice of Nirmata, and what were some of the key criteria that you used as you evaluated different solutions, different platforms, and advice for others who might be going through that same journey?
So let's look at Kubernetes, right? Basically, Kubernetes is a control plane in a manner of speaking to containers, which are the data plane. So if I am talking about setting up of my own control plane, we already observed that it is by definition, by choice and by design of creators of Kubernetes, it does only part of the job. So when we look at for developing and deploying and managing applications. So when we are looking for a choice of this control plane, there are these scenarios possible. I'll run it on my private infrastructure. I can borrow or I can subscribe rather to the control planes provided by public cloud guys. But invariably, they will integrate the control plane with their other services, such as use their compute instances, use their network and security architect. Obviously, they have to do that. Otherwise, how will you complete the picture? Because Kubernetes is by definition incomplete, and in order to make things ready for the developers and operations people, they integrate with their own services, which brings back the element of lock-in. So we were looking for a platform that would allow us. So yeah, before that, so either you should have ability to stand up your own do-it-yourself Kubernetes distribution and add all these things, or you should find an intermediate way where you can stand up your own upstream Kubernetes distribution, or you should be able to give a consistent control plane configurations no matter who is the control plane provider. So we are looking for something that allows us to be multi-cloud, realize consistent policy and management experience. And for that, we needed something that we could host ourselves and we could integrate with our cloud management for other resources. And Nirmata was the very good choice for these expectations of ours. And on top of that, as a philosophy, we're looking for agility and flexibility, and we are looking for a partner who will give us those things by way of their disposition as well as their technology. That's the summary.
Makes sense, yeah. And then those attributes you mentioned, right? Keeping things flexible, open, and not limiting choices. I think those core values definitely help with the synergies. Um, so yeah, so as we're kind of looking, towards on the cloud-based native scene, right? And you have the unique vantage point of working with a lot of technology companies, of course, in not just Silicon Valley but across the United States, and then also working with a lot of technology and other businesses, other enterprises in India. So how do you see the cloud native technology adoption, that trend playing out in the India and the Asia market?
See, when we started talking to customers about digital at core as the obvious next step to cloud at core, we were surprised by the resonance that we observed in our target audience. We have seen there are many businesses, small to big, who are creating and managing technology for consumption and improving the businesses in India, as opposed to a Bangalore and a Hyderabad or a Pune, Gurgaon, which were centers for servicing US markets or other Western markets. So this is a very pleasant surprise. I haven't. I mean, while I do go to India once in a while, the most recent trip before the pandemic struck on February 18 in the KubeCon, I saw a lot of energy and a lot of interest in companies wanting to go digital and who are doing digital already. So even the Prime Minister's campaign, which has been recently launched, has a specific section for applications. I mean, with all this banning of applications from neighboring country, they're explicitly encouraging people to go and develop these modern applications, even in the social or citizen services, whatever you want to call it. So I believe time is now for people to clearly think, even from a um, uh, different perspective, right? The strategy of slow recovery to be ready for ramp up in whatever time it takes, less than a year, more than a year, whatever. Now is the right time. There's never a good time, but now is the right time to take advantage of the forced push into digital. In fact, I mean, I don't want to go political, but the demonetization and the push for digital transactions and all that has happened a few years back, I believe has stood us in good stand in these times of social distancing. So the market is ready. Businesses should make their own decisions, but we're here to help them uh, pursue that ambition by giving whatever it takes.
Yeah, it's amazing and exciting to see the level of innovation and new technologies being developed and adopted. Yeah, so I think that sort of brings us towards the end of the session, and I know we had some questions. So let me quickly see what we have in the Q&A panel.
So we have a couple of questions. One is from Keshav Murli. His question is that running Kubernetes solutions on-prem deployment, especially for smaller settings, does it make sense to use Kubernetes in such cases?
Yeah. Hi, this is Keshava. I can add to that. Thanks for the great talk. So basically, we are a startup named Smart Sentry, and we provide AI solutions for in computer security, rather, surveillance and security space. So what we are trying to do is, especially we need a lot of compute to run our AI applications, like GPU-based compute. We want to try to build a hybrid solution where, or rather, we want to build a hybrid solution where we can run the heavy compute on premise. You can buy servers in like 3 servers or 4 servers, those kind of thing, and the rest of all the rich feature set, like analytics and all those things, we want to run in cloud. So I'm just wondering if it makes sense to have a Kubernetes-based scalable application for a very small setting, not like 4 or 5 servers,
Right.
that kind of scenario.
Yeah, so I can help answer that, and Ravi, feel free to chime in if there's any thoughts also. So a few things you might want to look at is there are some micro Kubernetes type of distributions also being developed. So there's something called micro K8s, there's K3s, there's KubeEdge, which are all trying to address this solution of Kubernetes at the edge. They are, so those could be interesting options. And it comes down to, again, what compute, what do you want to perform at the edge? We are seeing other use cases, other vendors we have worked with. They've talked about even putting Kubernetes in things like routers, devices, but those would be, again, very small footprint. So you're not going to take like the vanilla Kubernetes upstream and put it in a small embedded device.
I see.
Let's say if you have enough capacity, if you have enough compute power, the value Kubernetes gives is that self-healing capability. So even if you're running a few applications at the edge, if something goes down, to automatically recover. So there are some value propositions, but you have to evaluate it with the complexity trade-off, of course, and see if you can do remote management for those, and then address in that manner.
We can take one last question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Most welcome.
Thanks. We can take one last question from Narendra Kumar. His question is, VMs offer strong isolation. How do you see containers in security perspective? And I'm wondering why industry has not adopted micro VMs like containers.
Yeah, so in fact, there is again some work going on in that area. So if you've heard of something called Firecracker VMM, so every time you use AWS Lambda, you are running in a micro VM, and that VM is it's not like as you think of it as a traditional VM, and I think as you're alluding, it's much more efficient. It's designed to be brought up almost as efficiently as a container, and it can share some of the kernel capabilities, right? So what's happening is there are adapters now being written to also allow Kubernetes to orchestrate things like Firecracker, VMM, and other micro VMM type of technologies. So if you think about Kubernetes, as Ravi also mentioned, as a scheduler, as an orchestrator, the runtime now can be decoupled, right? So whether that runtime becomes a container or a micro VM, or perhaps in the future a unikernel, there could be flexibility. And it's just the evolution of technologies. Containers have maybe addressed most of the broad majority of the use cases, which is why we've seen, I think, that quick adoption of containers. But I do believe there's room and flexibility, and we will see other options emerge, especially for more secure environments. There's also some very interesting things with SGX and Enclave that's happening even in the firmware and in the from what Intel's doing at the chipset level, which could play into a lot of this evolution as well. So, but great question, and I think that trend will occur, and we will see some merging of that.
Thank you, Jim. I think we'll conclude with that. We have short our time slot. There was one more question, but I think Nitin, probably we can take this offline. You can shoot the question to me, and then I can pass it on to Ravi and Jim. And I also forgot to tell everyone that Nirmata is one of our recent portfolio companies, and we are really excited to have them on board. I would like to thank Jim and Ravi. I appreciate your time, and I think this was quite a great session, which was talking about Kubernetes and its business value. Thank you, gentlemen, and we probably will have another session in the future as well.
You're
Thank you,
most
Rajesh.
welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.